this lab, the directions are going to be a little less specific than in previous labs. This is done to encourage you to think independently a little bit about the tasks you're being asked to perform, and also encourage you to look around and gain more information than what's requested of you in the lab. Here is your mission. You've just been hired as a new assistant to the GIS specialist at the Grand Canyon National Park. They are doing some fascinating work in fire ecology and management, but there's a lot to learn before you can start being useful. Your initial task is to become familiar with the North Rim Slopes project. Along the way, you hope to become more familiar with the general fire ecology of the area, including the history, fuels, and management. You know that your next tasks will be to complete fuel treatment planning in Lab 4 and wildfire risk assessment in Lab 5. So the more familiar you are with the data now, the easier your job will be and the better you'll do. All you're given are several zipped files containing what you need and some tutorials to help you along the way. The first thing we'll do is organize and explore the data from the Grand Canyon National Park. Eric Gadula is the Fire GIS Specialist for the Grand Canyon National Park. He's worked for many years in that position, working on wildfire, prescribed fire, fuels planning projects, etc. He's seen the good, the bad, and the ugly data, and has had to figure out how to make the best of all of it. He's provided us with an array of data from the Grand Canyon that we'll be using to answer a variety of questions, and that you could even use for your final project. But first, we need to know where it is and what it means. To do that, we need to go to BBLearn and download all these zip files, including one Excel file. To do this, I recommend downloading it first into your Downloads folder, navigating to your Downloads folder, opening the zip file, selecting all the files and copying them, and then pasting them into the folder that you'll have created in your class folder for Lesson 3. So you'd paste that information here into a folder called Grand Canyon Data. My data is here in this Grand Canyon Data folder. So once you've completed that task, now it's time to explore the data. Notice that I can look at it here in my folder structure, but if I open many of these different folders, I see a lot of information that I don't understand. To really get an idea about what these look like, I'm going to need to go to ARC Catalog. So open your ARC Catalog. I did that by going to the Start menu and searching ARC Catalog. The purpose of this part of the exercise is to first understand what ARC Catalog is and what it can do for you, and then to explore some of the background information on each of these different layers. Notice we have a couple of symbols here. We've certainly got some folders and a shapefile, and these cylinders, which are geodatabases. Inside the geodatabase, we have geodata sets, and then we have, these are tables, and we also will have feature classes. To start with, we'll look at each of the layers that are specified in the lab and answer the questions as they come. One question is about projection. To find out about the projection, we'll need to go to Properties. So you could right-click on any of these layers and select Properties, and that'll give you information about the projections for each of these layers. For the other questions, you will be using the Contents, Preview, and mostly the Descriptions tab. In some cases, there won't be a description that's included, but for most layers, there's going to be some information. After we found the projection, it's a good idea to become familiar with what this area looks like, just so you can have some frame of reference. In the Slopes 2014 Severity folder, you can either look at the photos through ARC Catalog, but this is a bit of a slower way to do it. Each time you click on a photo, it might ask you to whether you want to triangulate or not. That's about the detail that you're able to see in the picture when you zoom in and out. You can either click yes or no. It speeds up the process a little bit if you click no. A quicker way to do this would be just to view the photos in your normal folder structure. So I'm going to go to this folder here, and I'm going to click through each of these pictures and just become familiar with what's there. These are the pre-fire and post-fire pictures of the Slopes project area. Using the Preview and Descriptions tab, you'll be able to answer the questions 2 through 12 by looking at the various layers that are mentioned in the lab. So for example, if you're looking for information on the Mount Emma area, you would click on some of the layers here and see which ones had information for you, specifically in the Descriptions tab. So this one doesn't have any. Let's click around a little bit more. This one has some information, and so we can probably get the answer to our question here. So that's what you'll be mostly doing, is just looking at the questions that you need to answer, figuring out which layer might contain that information, and then finding the information. We're now going to move on to looking at these layers visually in ArcMap. You can click this button here to open ArcMap, and we'll start by adding the layers that we'll be using for this exercise. We've got the Grand Canyon National Park and the surrounding national forest boundaries. We're looking at the Grand Canyon data in the fire history folder. And we need ignition points, fire history. And then we'll add information from the Slopes 2015 planning folder with an outline and aspect. Oh, I forgot target areas. So this should give us the information that we need to complete the next several steps. The first thing I want to do is to remove the Forest Service boundaries from this boundary layer. To do that, I'm going to right-click on this file, Open Attributes, highlight the National Park, and notice that it highlights here. And because I don't necessarily need to make this permanent, I am okay with just making this saving as a layer. So I'll take Selection and Create Layer from Selected Features, and I'll turn this off. In fact, I'll remove it. And now I have just the Grand Canyon National Park. I'm going to change the symbology here to hollow, and I'll make this a yellow border. So now we're going to start to explore the fire history of the Grand Canyon National Park. To begin, I'm going to add a base map so that I can have an understanding of where I'm looking. Again, I'm going to select my imagery. Something to note is that several of these processes that I'll be performing are going to take a little bit of time to fully complete. I am able to cut that time out so that you don't have to watch that, but you should pause the presentation if you'd like to follow along directly with what we're doing. So now we're going to explore our fire history. And for this project, we're mostly concerned with the North Rim. So let's zoom into this area north of the Grand Canyon. So with our fire history on, I'm going to turn these other pieces off. So this is a map of the fire history in the Grand Canyon National Park for about the last century. As you might expect, older records might not be as complete as more current records, but it's a pretty decent history for the area. As you can see, each of the polygons that are here have the year of the fire, the type of fire that it was, size, and information that you'll need to locate it and get information about it. Something that I want you to visually notice right off the bat is that there's a large area right in the middle that has not had fire activity on record for the last 100 years. This is the area that we are mostly going to be working in for this lab and for future labs. One question that you're asked is what human resource this area might be threatening if fire were to occur there. To answer that question, we'll need to add a different base map, the streets base map. And we'll move this above the imagery base map. And let's zoom into our area that's been unburned. Something that you'll see in a second is that these areas that have been burned, these little strips, those are actually part of the project, the planning project that we'll be working in. So these are relatively recent areas that have been burned. So looking at this map, what human feature do you see would be threatened if a fire were to occur in these areas? So now that we've had a chance to look at the area in general, I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to turn my street map off. I'll actually remove it. Now we're going to look more specifically at the fire history layer and get some additional information on these fires. To start, we're going to change the symbology, and I'll keep it black outline. And something that you can notice from the world imagery is that there is an area under these fire history layers. It looks like it burned relatively recently, at least from when this image was taken. So we're curious about which fire that is and how big it was. To do this, we will use the Identify tool and simply click on the area. Right now it's selected to give me information on the topmost layer, and since in my table of contents that's the boundary, that's what it's giving me, I want it to give me visible layers. I'll click again. So now I can either click on this, or I'm going to be clicking on the outlet fire and under the fire history layer, and that gives me what I need to know. So this is the outlet fire and it occurred in 2000. It gives me the information about that fire. Because it occurred in 2000, it gives you some kind of an idea about when this image was taken. Next, we're going to get some overall information from the fires that have occurred here. So open the attribute table, and using the information that you gained in the previous lab for summarizing information, we're going to create a summary table. So the question that we're being asked is, what year had the highest acres burned? So we're curious about year, and we're curious about acres burned. So we start with year, since we want to know it by year, and then information about acres burned. So right click, and summarize. And since we're interested in acres burned, we'll maximize this and select sum. This will give us the sum of acres burned per year. We'll open up our table. So you can see the count of fires and the sum of these areas that have been burned in those years. Now, something that you might be interested in is an overview of what this data look like. You can either export the information and do this in Excel, or to get a simple visual, you can go to Create a Graph. And for your value field, select Sum of GIS Area. And for your X label field, select fire year. And I'll stretch this out. What you can see is a pattern of fire acres over the years. Now, like I mentioned before, the records that we have for earlier years might not be as complete, but you do see a distinct pattern in more recent times as fires have increased in acres. And if you want to go through the process, you can finish it and create a nice looking graph here. It's a little bit messy, messier than you would if you had it in Excel, but something that's pretty easy to put together. So back to our attribute table for fire history. We also would like a summary of the types of fires. So notice we have a column here for type. And so I'm going to right click on type and again select summarize. And I'm also interested in the total acres per fire type. And I'll open up my table. And now I have an idea of how many acres over time have been involved in each of these planning strategies. Something that's interesting about the Grand Canyon National Park is that they have a very proactive prescribed burning program, as you can see in the numbers of acres that are represented here. Now we're going to do some manipulation of this fire history layer. So for fire history, again, I'm going to open my attribute table, and I'm going to locate the slopes project that I was mentioning before that's in this area that's not been burned. The reason for this is we'd like to select that out and make it its own individual layer. So I'm first going to sort the fire name. And for some reason it's not letting me scroll. Perhaps because Art Catalog is still open. Sometimes that interferes with things. So now I can scroll, and I'll be looking for the slopes project. So I'm going to highlight these rows. I can close this, and you can see which polygons are represented by the slopes project. When I created my Grand Canyon National Park layer, I didn't need that to be permanent. I'm not going to be adding that again, and it's something I can do easily. But for this layer, I would like it to be separated permanently. It's not going to take it out of the fire history, it's just going to make an additional layer. So to do this, I'm going to need to make a new feature class. So I'm going to start by clicking on my Art Catalog icon here and navigating to my folder. And in the fire history folder, I'm going to right click on fire history, this feature data set, I should say, and I'm going to select new feature class. I'm going to name this slopes RX completed. And click next, next, and finish. So this layer has just been added to my project. I'm not ready for it to be here though, and might interfere with my ability to edit it, so I'm going to remove it for now. And in fire history, right click and data, export. It's going to see that I have features selected, and so that's the default option. And I want it to save these selected features under this slopes RX completed. Do I want to overwrite this file? Yes, because there's nothing there yet. Click OK. And I do want to add it to the map. So now, clear my selection. You can see that a new layer has been added, and it's something that I can continue to add to different projects. Let's turn all the information on for the slopes project, both already completed and expected in the future. We have this slopes outline, which is the whole project area, but then you can see that you have individual polygons in that project area that are actually the areas that are planning to be burned. So how is the selection for these burned areas created? To answer that question, we'll need to look at the aspect layer. So these are all the different aspects in this area, and to get a better visualization on them, we're going to change our properties and make it into categories using aspect. And there's not a great fit for the aspects here. What we're hoping for is some kind of distinction between the north and south slopes especially. So I'm just going to pick one that has lighter colors and then make some manual adjustments to that. So I'm going to make my south slopes be darker colors so that they stand out. Click OK. What you can start to see if we make our target areas and our slopes completed hollow, I'm going to make the completed one color and the target areas another color. So what you can start to see is that there are distinct patterns for the slopes that are in these target areas, or the areas that have already been burned. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. And if you want to get a little bit more information on it, you can again use this identify tool. But the answer is pretty clear here. So we'll zoom back out. Now, something you might ask yourself after looking at this slopes project area and after looking at the fire history is why there is no plan to do any ignition in this area here to the east of the slopes project. So I asked Eric that question, and he explained that this is a different forest type. First of all, this is a mixed spruce fir, and the average fire interval for this area is around 300 years, so they feel like it's not been needing to have treatment as much as other areas have. The other reason is that this area to the north is national forest land, something that you can see as if we'll click these off, and if we toggle back and forth between our boundary, you can see a really distinct line in forest structure from park ownership to Forest Service ownership, and that's just different management strategies. So looking at this area, we do have some piece of fire here. Let's find out what that is and learn a little bit more about what its purpose was. So in the attributes table, that project area was called the Thompson Project. So we'll scroll down here to T. So this Thompson project was implemented over several years with thinning and then finally pile burning and then prescribed burning. When I worked on the Bandelier fire use module, we would come to the Thompson project area relatively frequently and help them with their thinning and piling and eventually with burning. One thing that you might also notice if you were to turn your ignition points on is that there have been fires in this area in the last century. But these fires have been suppressed or just didn't get very large. The reason that they were suppressed is that this project had not yet been completed and they weren't ready to allow these fires to burn. What their hope is that by treating the area here in the Slopes project and by having this, what they're calling a catcher's mitt on the Thompson project, that if a fire were to occur here, then it would be allowed to burn, at least during certain times of the year. So now we're going to save our ArcMap project. We're going to leave it open for now. We'll need to use our ArcMap project to select an area to download land fire data. Your next step in this assignment is to complete the reading. The reading is located here, the North Rim Slopes Plan amended. This is the burn plan for the area. Maybe just as a little bit of background to help you understand the plan a little bit more. These areas, as we now know, were primarily located on south-facing slopes. The intention was to go into the area in the September time frame when fuels are still relatively dry but about to go into a more moist condition, and to apply ping pong balls, which are ping pong balls that are filled with chemicals and then injected with something else that when they land on the ground, they ignite in an understory fashion. So it's a really efficient way to put a lot of fire on the ground. So for this area, the completed area, there were a total of 5 personnel on this fire over several days, and 3 in the aircraft, 2 on the ground, verifying fire behavior. And they started by putting a strip of fire on the ridge line, allowing that to burn a little bit. So they would put several strips along several ridges, and then they would put another strip of fire pretty immediately below that, and then they would put a final strip at the bottom near the drainage. They would start ignition around 1 o'clock and allow that to burn into the evening. There were no control lines placed around these polygons. The only holding lines were that the ridges broke down into a north-facing slope, and that on the valleys they broke up into a north-facing slope. And so they used the moisture differential from the north to south to hold the fire in different locations. The total cost per acre of this initial step was about $6 per acre, which is pretty incredible. And they found that they had decent fire effects. And if you, now that you're a little more familiar with it, you can go back again to those photos and just look at those pre-fire and post-fire photos just to get an idea about how the fire behaved with that type of burn pattern. So now you can go and read this burn plan, focusing on the executive summary, certainly, and the site description. There's a lot of information in there, a lot of detailed information maybe that you don't need to know. For example, the ignition plan and things like that. So you're mostly curious about this project as a whole and why it's important and why it's interesting in the way that they've been able to apply fire over a large area. Now that you've completed the reading the North Slopes prescribed fire plan, we're going to be working to download some land fire data. To do that, I've provided this cheat sheet that was created by Tessa Nicolette, who is the regional fire ecologist for the Forest Service in the Southwest region. And she not only personally assists in the data management and processing for the whole Southwest region, but she oversees and trains others in how to do it as well. So she put together several of these different cheat sheets. This is a pretty useful guide and basic instructions in downloading land fire data. So we'll open that up, and we'll need to go to landfire.gov. Landfire and the tools that are associated with landfire go through pretty frequent updates to maintain the most current, or as current as possible, information that you can use. One of the tools that's quite useful that's available on the landfire site is something called the LF Data Access Tool, or LFDAT. You can access that from that main page. You can download the tool here, download LFDAT, and it brings you to a page where the user guide and tutorials are. There's lots of information here for you to check out. So something to pay attention to is these versions. So for a long time, before there was a version of LFDAT for 2.3, then the LFDAT toolbar wasn't available. You could use it with a version of ARC of 10.2, but it wouldn't have the most current landfire data that you were downloading. The only way to get that most current landfire data was to go to the site, which is going to be shown, the process is going to be shown to you as we go through this lab. But it's important to note that a lot of these programs, ARC especially, update really frequently, and only sometimes are the other programs that are associated with ARC able to keep up with the many changes that ARC goes through. So for this lab, you can go ahead and download LFDAT, and you can use the information in Tessa Nicolette's cheat sheet for how to download data with that LFDAT tool. It is faster and a little bit, just a little bit less steps to go through to do that download process. This tutorial is going to walk you through the process of downloading it from this site. Either way, if you're downloading it from this site or if you're downloading it with the LFDAP toolbar, there's something that you need to pay attention to, and I'll show you here. When you download, when you go to your area to select the data, make sure that you are downloading the 2012 landfire data. There's a couple reasons for this. This tutorial was originally made with the 2012 data, and inevitably, as you're working with landfire data, you're probably going to have some kind of need to update that landfire data. It's been a couple years. Even now, the most current version of landfire data is 2014, which just recently came out. And so even if you're using the 2014, you need to make some updates to the landfire data if there had been disturbances on the site before or after your data acquisition. So just to show you what that looks like, this is the landfire 2014 data, and we are interested in the landfire 2012 data here, and mostly in the fuels layers, but that will be discussed as we get further on in the exercise. So again, just make sure to download the 2012 data, and then through the next tutorial, you'll be able to go through and make some changes to specifically the fuel models in that 2012 data set so that it most accurately represents the area on the ground based on what people know about the vegetation on the ground and on the disturbances that have happened since 2012. So we're going to go to, on the web page here, Get Data. And on this initial map, it doesn't really matter that much as to where you click. So you're going to just kind of click in the general direction that you are working in. We're going to specify the more exact location using lat longs. So as this loads, I'm going to go to my ArcMap project here. Notice when I move my cursor around, I see that there are numbers that move down here at the bottom in meters. I'd like that to be displayed as decimal degrees. So under View and Data Frame Properties, I'm going to change this display to decimal degrees. Click OK. And now as I move my cursor, you can see these decimal degrees that are changing. So I'm going to record the different extent of my area so that I can enter that into the landfire.gov page. So we'll go back to the landfire page. And under the world here, we're going to go to Download Data. So we can either drag a box across, but even though I'm looking for a really distinct land feature like the Grand Canyon, it's hard to find. And so there may be a better way to do this in landfire.gov, but I haven't found it yet. So we'll just specify it with our XY, and then we're sure to get the right area. So notice we have some positive values for latitude and latitude here, and then negative values for longitude. So let's go back to our image here, and I'm just going to hold my cursor above my project area, and I'm going to record my positive number, so 36.361. And then go back, and I'm going to get the bottom of my project area. And so we're just interested in this north rim of the Grand Canyon for our purposes. It's helpful because it also decreases the amount of area that we're downloading for. Actually, I'm going to change my northern number just a little bit so that we get all of the North Rim project area. So 36,389. And then the bottom, sufficient to go around here, 36.115. And then to the right, 111.861. Make sure that you're including the negative value there. And then over to the side, negative 112.445. So leave it like that for now. Don't click add area. That's what we'll click once we've selected our data. So one thing to note is that there already is a layer selected, this existing vegetation. We don't need that for right now. Instead, you're going to be selecting all the other layers that are specified in your lab handout. So we'll need, first our topographic stuff, we'll need aspect, elevation, and slope. And then we will need the 13 fire behavior fuel models and the 40 fire behavior fuel models, and then these 4 layers here. Notice that we have some LCP files, these landscape scale files that are already created. We're not going to be working with those for this class. Once we have those those layers selected, we're going to click add area. So you can see all of the data that we have here. Now under the instructions from Tessa, she recommends that we modify our data request to specify our projection. And notice that it has all the layers that are options here, and in each of these that we've selected, we can change some different features on them, but we're going to leave those the same for now. And save changes and return to summary. Now you can download each of these individual layers. You can either do them one at a time and go through the process completely with each one, or you can click them all at once and have a whole bunch of windows open and just open as you go and unzip as you go. Your data request is added to a line, and then it extracts the data. So when the data extraction's been complete, you'll get a window like this. You can either click here. I'm guessing in just a little bit I'll have a download bar that shows up as to where that file, the zipped file, has then been saved. There it is. So what I like to do is just open it up in the downloads folder, and then I copy this information out and I'll put it in my data folder for the class. So you'll be doing that with each of the layers, pasting that, and this is what you'll eventually have is all your layers here. And then when you go and open those in your project, you're going to be selecting this grid looking piece. So creating pyramids is something you'll be asked. It's something that when you're zooming in and out, it might speed up or slow down the speed at which it displays. For now, I'm just going to select yes. You can go either way. And if it's really slow, you can re-add it and select no. So notice that I have my area selected now. This is the extent that we're going for. It looks like I have one little polygon that's out, and that's just fine. We're mostly curious about this slopes area here. So continue to download all of your landfire layers and add them to your project and save your project for Lab 4. We're now going to work on installing ARC fuels. This is a tool that we're going to be using in the next several exercises. From arcfuels.org, you can click on check out the new online tutorial. We'll be using this online tutorial to not only understand how to download ARC fuels, but also we'll be following this tutorial with the Grand Canyon data. So we'll start at Download and Setup and downloading ARC Fuels 10. Notice that for Forest Service employees, you can run this via Citrix, which is a way that you can add something to your computer without needing administrative privileges. Navigating this site can be a little confusing sometimes. You'll need to click the Show Me How if you'd like to see some more information. And we have a couple different download buttons. The first one is to download ARC Fuels itself. And then there are these other download buttons that you would need to go through if you were to complete the entire exercise that's outlined in the ARC Fuels tutorial. We are going to be just completing part of that, so we don't need all of them, but we do need a couple. So let's start with ARC Fuels 10. So again, I go to my downloaded folder, I open it. So according to the directions, I'm told to create an ARC Fuels folder in my C folder. And I've created that here. And you paste that ARC Fuels file into this new folder. Now that we've done that step, we need to continue on down the line with demonstration data. If you're curious about the entire tutorial for ARC Fuels, you're certainly welcome to download the demonstration data. We will not be using it for our exercise though. So I'm going to move on to downloading some programs. Now for this exercise, we are primarily going to be using FlamMap, but it is probably a good idea to have the other files downloaded as well. That way, if you are curious, you can explore around a little bit, especially if you are downloading the tutorial data for the Mount Emma site, which is what the ARC Fuels tutorial uses. So once that's been downloaded, again, you're going to copy that information out of the zipped file, and you will put it into your ARC Fuels folder in the C drive. So here you have your programs folder and your ARC Fuels file. So now under demonstration data, we're going to set up our ARC Fuels project a little bit. To do this, we need to activate our ARC Fuels toolbar. And I have mine turned on here already, but you would go to Customize and Add-ins Manager. So you would find your ARC Fuels information, which is an add-in. So you'd notice that it's here in your add-ins, and it may just show up for you, but you can also add that manually. And then if it's not on, you can go to your toolbars and make sure that ARC Fuels toolbar is checked. So from your ARC Fuels toolbar, we want to select Project and then Project Settings. This will tell ARC Fuels where we have these different programs stored. Because we're only going to be using FlamMap, that's the most important one to do. So we'll navigate to our Programs folder and FlamMap. So this is essentially just a shortcut to the FlamMap program. You can also have FlamMap as a separate program, but this is kind of a convenient way to access them all. I'm just going to go ahead and locate my other programs as well. Didn't download Behave. So I just have FVS. To find the exact files that you need to add, I'm going to refer to the tutorial here. Now we're complete, and I'll go to the Folders tab. And I'm going to set up my folders as shown on this site. So I'll navigate to my ARC Fuels folder that I created on my C drive. Select the ARC Fuels folder and click OK. And do the same for the data folder, KCP outputs. This is just going to help ARC Fuels know where to put information that you create during your work. And output. And output. Now we can click close. And the last thing we'll do to set ARC Fuels up is we'll follow the directions here for exporting settings. So we'll go to Project, Export Settings, and we're going to label our settings Grand Canyon Project Settings. So that way when we start a new project, we can simply import these Grand Canyon project settings, and it'll keep all of the referencing that we just completed in the projects folder. With that completed, you are now ready to participate in future labs and ready to get started with some analysis of fuel treatment effectiveness and then later wildfire risk assessment.